The current conflicts are not the finale. They are only the first phase. It will look like a truce, he said. But that truce would only be the silence before the storm. He claimed that Europe would gradually fade, while the main war would erupt in Asia and Iran, Afghanistan, China, and Turkey. And once again, this matches precisely with the geopolitical situation that began to escalate rapidly in 2024, and especially in 2025. But what is even more frightening, Zhirinovsky also spoke about specific timeframes. He mentioned 2025 as the moment when the second wave would begin. In one of his interviews, he said, "If by 2025 no agreement is reached, then it will be too late. Everything will collapse like a chain reaction." In the context of the growing conflict in the Middle East, the pressure of sanctions, the collapse of old alliances, and rising instability in Asia, his words sound less like politics and more like prophecy. He named specific geographic flashpoints: Tel Aviv, Tehran, Kabul, Beijing. These, he said, would be the nodes of the future conflict. Ukraine would be forgotten the moment the East ignites. That was his logic. The world's attention would shift, and the conflict in Europe would be frozen or ended without a clear conclusion, as if a sacrifice had been made, and the world moved on to the next catastrophe. Today, we already see it. Western media writes less and less about Ukraine, and more about the Middle East. That is exactly what Zhirinovsky predicted. They will forget about Kyiv when they hear that Jerusalem is burning, and these words are beginning to sound frighteningly realistic. All this forces us to look differently at the man who, in his lifetime, was considered too emotional. Perhaps he truly knew more than he revealed. The most striking thing is how systematic his thinking was. Zhirinovsky didn't just throw out loud phrases. His speeches had a clear logic, as if he already knew the script. He understood that the war in Ukraine was not an independent conflict, but merely a part of the greater geopolitical game. He openly said, "Ukraine is just territory others are fighting over. It decides nothing. The decisions are made in Washington, Beijing, Ankara, and Tehran." At the time, such statements sounded almost scandalous, but today, Western analysts repeat them. It's as though time has caught up with his words. One of the key fragments of his speeches was the mention of a so-called temporal arc, which was supposed to begin in 2022 and end by 2026. He said, 4 years of chaos. Everything will burn, everything will mix. Then they will begin to draw new borders. He did not specify who exactly would draw those borders, but from the context it was clear. He meant global agreements between great powers. And indeed, since 2022, we have witnessed a complete reshaping. NATO is strengthening. China behaves ever more aggressively, and Russia has been cut off from the Western world. New axes of power are emerging. Turkey, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, China, Russia, Iran, everything. Exactly as he described. The old world will vanish, the West will weaken, and the East will speak. Amazingly, Zhirinovsky even indirectly predicted the energy crisis that began after 2022. In one of his speeches, he said, "They won't care about ideals. They will just want to stay warm in winter." After the start of the war in Ukraine, and Europe's cutoff from Russian energy resources, millions of people faced exactly this problem. That was no longer a metaphor, it became a documented reality. Some believe Zhirinovsky had access to classified information from intelligence services and analytical centers, and that he drew conclusions from it, delivering them in his own style. Emotionally, sometimes crude, but always precise. He could not be ignored. That was the paradox. People listened to him, but they did not hear him. He warned, he joked, he prophesied, he shouted. And now, when events unfold almost exactly as he predicted, it feels unsettling. Perhaps his main insight was not about dates, but about the very logic of the future. He said, "While you're watching the front, a whole continent burns behind. You're back." And today, this is felt more sharply than ever. Ukraine is no longer the main subject. Everyone is watching the East. All the world's attention is on the place where flames comparable to a world war may erupt. Zhirinovsky knew it would be so, and perhaps that is why, in his final years, he repeated, "You will remember me," more than once. But the most disturbing part was how he described the conclusion. In one of his last public speeches, in late 2020, just months before his death, Zhirinovsky declared, "We are entering an era of short pauses and long catastrophes. Ukraine is not the end. The end is the regrouping of all humanity. The old world will collapse, and those who are weak today will become decisive." At the time, no one took this seriously. But look at what is happening now. Old alliances are collapsing. NATO is balancing on the verge of internal fracture. It appears powerless, while new alliances like BRICS are growing ever more influential. This is not fantasy, it is a real transformation of the global balance of power, which Zhirinovsky foresaw with startling accuracy. He predicted not only geopolitics, but also society's reaction. He said, "People will grow tired of fear. They will beg for silence even if that silence is a lie." This sounds exactly like today's atmosphere. The world does not want war, but it cannot stop it. People no longer know where truth ends, and mere information noise begins. Jiranovsky claimed that this would become the main strategy of the future, to create so many parallel versions of reality that no one could know which one they were living. In Dot, he gave special attention to 2025. He explicitly said, if by 2025 there is no new global treaty, the countdown will begin. First the economy, then new borders, then the nuclear threat. At the time, those words sounded like exaggeration, but in 2025, international discourse increasingly features phrases like a new security architecture, the inevitability of US-China conflict, nuclear risk in Israel and Iran. We are approaching the very point he so often mentioned, the point of reassembly. Jiranovsky never called himself a prophet. He laughed at the idea. But today, as almost everything he said comes true, it is difficult to shake the feeling that he truly knew or sensed far more than he revealed. He was a player, but in this chaos, he saw a pattern. And so his warning, "You will remember me," no longer sounds like provocation, but is the final line of a prophecy. The time has come to remember what he tried to warn us about. The time has come to listen closely to the words that people once laughed at. Today, as the world's attention shifts steadily from Ukraine to the Middle East, Jiranovsky's words are becoming especially relevant. He repeatedly stressed, when Ukraine burns, it is a warning. When the Middle East burns, that is the beginning of the Great War. Back then, people only half listened, but if we analyze current events, it is chilling. In the final months of 2024, and especially in early 2025, the Middle East situation escalated sharply. First came attacks on Israeli territory from Hezbollah and Yemeni Houthis, then IDF strikes on targets in Iran and Syria. In response, massive rocket barrages and drone swarms against Israel, and further destabilization in Gaza. In May 2025, Israel, for the first time since 1973, activated its nuclear triad to full combat readiness. These moves were confirmed by Western intelligence. In turn, Iran put its aerospace forces on high alert. All of this happened within weeks, and then, for the first time, global media openly began to say, we are on the brink of a regional nuclear war. This is precisely what Jiranovsky warned about. Back in 2014, he said, the real strike will not come from the West, it will come from where there has never been pest, the Middle East. First Ukraine, then there, and then everything will truly begin. These words are on video, documented. In 2021, he clarified, Ukraine will be the battlefield, but not the center of the catastrophe. The center will be Persia, the Holy Jerusalem, and Turkey. From there will come the chain reaction. And now, as the world trembles at the possibility of direct war between Iran and Israel, everything that once sounded strange in his words has turned into a terrifying prophecy, because he didn't say maybe. He said, it will be, and everything he forecast is unfolding step by step. But what does this have to do with Ukraine? Everything. Jiranovsky repeated many times. The Ukrainian conflict will not end in victory. It will end in a shift of attention. He believed Ukraine would not be defeated, but forgotten. That is exactly what we are beginning to see in real time. By late 2024, mentions of the war in Ukraine in major Western media had dropped by 37%. At the same time, coverage of the Middle East nearly doubled. The information agenda is the mirror of politics. If something is spoken of less, there is a political decision behind it. From early 2025, U.S. and European financial and military aid to Ukraine has begun to shrink. Internal crisis in the U.S. elections, the rise of isolationism, all of this is freezing foreign commitments. Meanwhile, Israel is receiving tens of billions of dollars in the shortest time, and again, the prophecy comes true. Ukraine will not lose, it will simply be abandoned. According to Jiranovsky, this was inevitable. He insisted that the West viewed Ukraine as a tool against Russia, not as a valued ally. He said, Ukraine has no shield. The West will give money, but not life. And as soon as another hotspot emerges, all attention will go there. Words spoken more than 10 years ago are now materializing with frightening precision. As for the Middle East, he spoke of it as the future epicenter of chaos.